Hello again. Rob has some breaking news for us as it relates to Chris Pincher.
Yeah, Chris Pincher, who had his appeal against an 8-week suspension from the Commons turned down, he has now decided to resign as an MP. That news coming to us through the PA news agency. What this means clearly is that we will have another by-election, another potentially difficult by-election, this time in Chris Pincher's, well, I guess now former Tamworth seat in Staffordshire. Now, he was investigated for alleged sexual assaults at the Carlton Club, a private Conservative members club in central London. And the allegations connected to it eventually led to the downfall, really, of Boris Johnson when it emerged that he knew about a former investigation, a previous investigation into his ally, Mr Pincher. An investigation took place. There was a recommendation for an 8-week suspension, which was above the threshold needed to potentially trigger a recall petition. So we may have seen his constituents forcing a by-election anyway. So Christopher Pincher has clearly decided that rather than wait for that process to potentially play out, he will go now, resign now. But that does mean for the Prime Minister, for Rishi Sunak, you've got another by-election, this time in Tamworth in Staffordshire, where he has got a chunky majority.
What's the majority?
It's 22% swing would be needed to take that. So he's got a 20,000 majority, although this was a seat that in 97 was held by Labour. There was actually a by-election in 1996 in the predecessor seat, South East Staffordshire, where there was a 22-point swing and it went from Tories to Labour. So there is history in this seat, if you like, and I think it's the type of seat that will be difficult for Labour, but if they are trying to project that they are truly on a path to a majority, they will want to, at the very least, be very competitive in this seat.
Yeah, so he wouldn't potentially have had much choice anyway, because his electorate could have got rid of him.
Absolutely. There's a threshold over which, if you get a suspension over a certain duration, it can trigger what's called a recall petition. That hadn't been launched yet, but what that would have meant is if 10% of his constituents had signed this petition, then it would have triggered an automatic by-election anyway. So we haven't actually heard directly, had a statement from him yet, but what it seems to suggest is that he thought that potentially this was the route that his constituents were going to go down, and that rather than have this long, drawn-out process, he will just go now, I guess, to an extent on his own terms. But, of course, he had appealed that 8-week suspension. He had tried to get the independent expert panel, the body, essentially, that looks at these suspensions and looks at these punishments. He wanted to try and get them to overturn this. They said no, which meant the 8-week suspension stood. So he potentially could have been forced. It was an accusation related to groping two men in the Carlton Club, a predominantly Conservative-focused private members club in St James in London. And the fallout from that and previous investigations that had taken place into him eventually led to Boris Johnson being ousted as Prime Minister after it emerged that he knew more about those previous investigations into Mr Pincher that he had initially said. So it has taken a while, as ever, for the formal process and investigatory process to play out, but what it has resulted in is another Tory MP having to fall on their sword and another difficult by-election potentially for the Prime Minister.